a football will appear when you do, and also helps tremendously with the YouTube algorithm. And with those prefaces out of the way, let's begin! And we are starting today's video with a team that has not been discussed in a positive light too often over the last few years, and it's the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns initially had the number 2 overall pick in the 2025 draft, then traded back 3 spots with the Jags to acquire an additional 2nd and 4th round pick in 2025, as well as a 2026 first. Now, Cleveland also sent a 2025 4 and a 6, but the big part of the trade was of course the 2 and next year's 1. And it's one thing to acquire draft capital and to have ammo to move up and down the board as you please, but what you have to remember is you still have to hit on the picks. And nearly 8 months later, the Browns undoubtedly hit on several picks in the 2025 draft. Now, with the Browns defense, not just this year, but, well, really every year since 2017, you immediately think of Myles Garrett, and rightfully so. But Mason Graham has started to come along as an interior rusher, and very quietly, he's 3rd in the 2025 draft class in pressures with 29 in the year, and 1st among all rookie interior defensive linemen. Naturally, as an interior defensive lineman, the statistical impact is going to be limited, but Graham has been playing at a high level for a little over a month now, and he is a good piece along this defensive line. Now, Cleveland had 2 second-round picks in linebacker Carson Schlesinger and running back Quinshon Judkins, and there's a reason that Carson Schlesinger is the overwhelming favorite to win the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. He's instinctual, he does a great job in run defense, and I think that at times it's underappreciated because the AFC North is a tough and gritty division, and you need to be able to stop the run in this division, especially late in December when football matters most. And like we said with Mason Graham, Myles Garrett is who gets the most attention on this defense, but Schlesinger has shown flashes of a future All-Pro throughout his rookie year, and that's not an exaggeration. And if he stays healthy, Cleveland has a high-quality starter for the next 5+ years. They also selected running back Quinshon Judkins in the 2nd round with the pick they acquired from the aforementioned Jags trade, and at the time of this video release, Judkins is leading rookies in both rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. And not only that, but per PFF, he's also 9th in average yards after contact per carry, with an average of 3.39 yards after contact, and ahead of a few notable backs like Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Josh Jacobs. And the Browns' offensive line hasn't been great this year, and I really like the future of Judkins in Cleveland. Harold Fannin has also played really well and is 5th in the 2025 class in receiving yards, with over 500 yards in his first 12 games. Tight ends typically take longer to develop as they have to both block at the NFL level and of course run routes at the NFL level, and Harold Fannin has been tremendous for a 3rd round rookie tight end. And when we discuss prospects in the 2026 NFL draft process, you'll hear me emphasize that teams need to simply draft good football players or floor-raising players, and that's exactly what the Browns did in the 2025 draft. And this is a conversation for another video, but there are Browns fans out there at the moment who want to keep GM Andrew Berry and move on from Kevin Stefanski due in large part to this draft. They also selected Dillon Gabriel, running back Dylan Sampson, and of course Shedeur Sanders, and I don't think Gabriel or Sanders will be the guy in Cleveland for the long haul, but I do love the idea of Dylan Sampson being a legit RB2 for the next few years. And today's video is sponsored by PrizePicks and my code GFB. Unfortunately, we went 0-3 a couple of weeks ago, and when you are choosing more or less on yards for a player, I would argue going 0-3 is as impressive as going 3-for-3 because you went 100% on your picks just in the wrong direction. But anyways, we are looking to get back on track in Week 14, and today's video is sponsored by the season-long partner of the channel, PrizePicks. And with our Week 14 lineup, we're keeping it simple. Every game from here on out is a playoff game for the Bengals, so we're taking Joe Burrow more than 255.5 passing yards. Adonai Mitchell's target share has increased significantly over the past few weeks, including a 12-target game in Week 13, and that's why we're taking Adonai Mitchell more than 46.5 receiving yards. J.J. McCarthy has obviously stunk in 2025, and I wouldn't be upset at all if this play didn't cash because he had a good game, but we are taking J.J. McCarthy lower than 190.5 passing yards. Always play responsibly, and when you make your first $5 deposit on PrizePicks using code GFB, PrizePicks will give you $50 in lineups instantly, and it'd be a real shame if the J.J. McCarthy play didn't cash because, again, I wouldn't be upset at all if he had a great game and finally looked like a first-round pick, but again, when you make your first $5 deposit on PrizePicks using code GFB, they will give you $50 in lineups instantly. Always play responsibly, and a big thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. The Las Vegas Raiders are in today's video for a couple of reasons, and out of the teams that we discussed that have had bad classes so far, I think they have the best chance to turn it around. And for transparency, whenever we did the initial draft grades video, I gave the Raiders a B+. I had some concern and questions with how they handled the middle part of the draft specifically, and we are seeing that 8 months later, but why I think they have a chance to really turn it around is right now Jack Bech has 10 receptions for 114 receiving yards in the year, and Jack Bech to me was a pretty straightforward evaluation. He was a top 50 prospect for me. I had him actually at player number 50 exactly, and I thought this was a player that could come in and be a 600 to 800 yard type year player. And this isn't me refusing to acknowledge that I was wrong on a prospect, because I have been wrong on countless prospects before and will continue to be wrong in the future, but this is a player that is simply not played. I mean, he'll get 1 target a game outside of the Indy game where he actually had 5 targets. He'll get his 1 target a game and then he'll be benched. And there is a clear disconnection between Pete Carroll and John Spytek. And I do think in some ways that Jakobi Meyers, aside from it being a lost season for the Raiders and the fact that they probably acknowledged internally that they were not going to bring Jakobi Meyers back, that John Spytek wanted to trade him so that his guys could play because they spent 2 selections at the receiver position within the first 4 rounds. Obviously Jack Bech and receiver Dante Thornton, but there's this disconnection between Pete Carroll and John Spytek where Pete Carroll will say something to the effect of, you know, we really want to see these rookies show that they want to have it in practice, or something along those lines, that they need to show they want to play, as if the rest of the team isn't showing that they're already not good. I mean, they are 2-10 for a reason, and there's a reason that one of their 2 wins was against the Tennessee Titans, who have a very real chance to go back-to-back number 1 overall picks, and the other win was, funnily enough, against the Patriots back in Week 1, which was obviously an outlier game based on where each team is at this point in the year. But also within this, I feel really bad for the fans, because it's one thing to be a bad team or to have a losing record, or a very big losing record like the Raiders and ultimately the Browns have, but at least with Cleveland, you can convince yourself heading into the week, or really start to believe, hey man, Quinshon Judkins is playing good. Carson Schlesinger will probably be the defensive rookie of the year. I can look forward to watching my guys play, but there's a refusal outside of Ashton Jeanty to even play the rookies, and that's extremely frustrating because, like we mentioned, it's not like the Raiders are killing it to the point where, hey, we don't have to play our rookies because we are doing so good to begin with. In fact, it's near the exact opposite. Third-round corner Darian Porter has played less than 300 defensive snaps, and they're playing Kyu Blu Kelly over him right now, and it's not like Kyu Blu Kelly is a prime Richard Sherman by any means, and right now he actually has a season passer rating when targeted of over 100 when quarterbacks throw Kyu Blu Kelly's way. So with the Raiders being at 2-10, I have no idea why Jack Bech isn't getting more targets. I have no idea why Darian Porter isn't a starter every single week to at least see what you have for 2026 and beyond. And for that matter too, I don't know why Dante Thornton isn't on the field either when he's shown at times that he's capable of making big plays. And my frustration with the Raiders is the disconnect between Pete Carroll, the team, and John Spytek. And like we prefaced with this, I think out of any team that has a chance to turn it around with their draft class, I do think it is the Raiders, but this is undoubtedly an extremely frustrating situation that in a lot of ways is preventable. Now, we did not discuss Ashton Jeanty throughout that portion of the Raiders draft, but the reality is, to me, if he can produce an 11 or 1,200 total yard year along with double-digit touchdowns as a rookie in what is undoubtedly a very, very bad situation for him to personally succeed in, then whenever he has a competent coaching staff around him and a competent game plan every week next year, then I think he will be fine. And maybe this is a hot take based on how his rookie year's played out, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if he makes the Pro Bowl next year. Now, one team that has had a really good draft, which would be an understatement through the first 13 or 14 weeks of the 25 season, is the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks did a really good job on draft weekend of simply what I like to call acquiring better football players and raising the floor of this team, and it really started with the selection of Gray Zabel, an offensive lineman from North Dakota State, who has done a really good job playing left guard for the Seahawks, because if you know anything about the 2024 Seahawks, their interior offensive line was a mess, and Grey Zabel has done a really good job playing next to Charles Cross, and at the time of this video release, has allowed a grand total of 0 sacks in his rookie season, which is obviously very impressive. They also selected Nick Emanwari in the second round, and Emanwari was a prospect I liked a lot, but I also thought he was a player that was a kind of hyper-specific player where if he went to a team that didn't have a game plan for him or a clear role in a system, then he could very easily be viewed as a draft bust. But obviously, whenever we found out that he was going to Mike McDonald and going to the Seattle Seahawks, the worry that I had about him going to a bad landing spot instantly vanished, and I thought that he was going to be a really good player, and we've seen that when Emanwari is on the field, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he makes a Pro Bowl at some point in his career. Elijah Arroyo is a rookie tight end, and whenever he's gotten the ball, he's flashed, but the reality is, for any rookie tight end, if you produce anything more than 500 or 600 yards, at least in your rookie season, to me, that is a home run of a draft pick, and I think with the flashes we've seen with Elijah Arroyo whenever he gets the football, that there is going to be something there in the long run, but right now, at least from a statistical impact, the impact has not been very good, but that kind of also is going to happen when Jackson Smith-Njigba is having the year that he's having. And another player, speaking of receiver, was what I thought was another good football player. I had Torrey Horton inside my top 100. They selected him at pick 166, and you've seen that Torrey Horton has 5 receiving touchdowns on the year and has been a really good player for a day 3 selection, and I think that there is a reality that he is a legit Robin to Jackson Smith-Njigba's Batman, and throughout the course of his rookie contract and over the next few years, I think there's a very real scenario where Torrey Horton has a 700 or 800 yard year along with 7 to 9 touchdowns. And obviously, when you think of the 2025 Seattle Seahawks, you probably think of Sam Darnold, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Mike McDonald, maybe even Clint Kubiak, but the impact that the rookies have had has been substantial, and there is a reason that the Seahawks will be playing meaningful football in January, and that I don't think anybody would be surprised if they go to the NFC Championship game. The Carolina Panthers are up, and if you guys are not aware, we do a draft grade video for every NFL team immediately following each draft, and it's one of my favorite videos of the entire year. It's several months of hard work, culminating into one 3-day weekend, and the video is released a few hours after each draft. And the reason I bring this up is the Panthers were one of 3 teams I gave an A+ draft grade to back in April, and 8 months later, I think that grade holds up. I absolutely love this class from top to bottom, and it of course started with Tetairoa McMillan, and all throughout the pre-draft process, I couldn't believe how overthought he was as a prospect, and there was a point where people were talking about McMillan falling to the late teens and even the early 20s, and when the Panthers took him at number 8 overall, I clapped my hands and said out loud, yes, because of how excited I was with this pick. And even in the second round, Nick Scorton was another player that I thought was also overthought, and at the time of this video release, Scorton is tied for 5th amongst rookies in pressures, and given that he is only 21 years old, well, I think he will only get better as time goes on. Princely Umanmielen has played sparingly so far, but I do think he will be an eventual replacement for DJ Wonnum, and even in the worst case, which I don't think will happen, but even in the worst case, he's still a solid depth rusher as a 3rd round pick. They also had a really good pick on day 3 as they selected safety Lathan Ransom in the 4th round, and Lathan Ransom has been getting more snaps as the season goes on, and most recently had a season-high 11 tackles against the Rams, including a sack, and played a big part in the Panthers pulling off the improbable victory. But with Tetairoa McMillan as the prize of this class, well, he's a player that could very easily be an 1,100-yard rookie, as he already has 826 yards in 13 games, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he finishes the year with 11 or even 1,200 yards. And I am a firm believer that if he is having this type of success at 22 years old and showcasing an impressive ability to run routes, especially for how big of a receiver that he is, well, I know this may surprise you here, but I do think he will be a 1,000-yard receiver for several years. Hell, probably close to the next decade if he stays healthy, and I don't throw that word around often because of how fast things change in the NFL. But with McMillan, the 2 pass rushers in Scorton and Umanmielen, as well as a promising safety in Lathan Ransom, it's not a coincidence the Panthers are in contention for the NFC South right now. They also selected tight end Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame, who quietly has 2 receiving touchdowns on the year, and I'm not saying this was a huge hit by any means, but getting 138 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns out of a rookie day 3 tight end certainly is solid production for where he was drafted. And one of the big things about the 2025 NFL draft, at least leading up to it, was you heard people talking about this class and refer to it as a meat and potatoes draft. And what they meant by this was that there would be a lot of solid players within this class, but probably no true generational players. Think 2021 with Jamar Chase, Penei Sewell, Micah Parsons, and Pat Surtain, among others for reference. And nearly 8 months after the 2025 draft, we are seeing how good some teams are at evaluating talent, or in some cases, how bad teams are at evaluating talent. And the Panthers drafted not just one, but several high-floor players within the 2025 draft, and you're seeing the results pay off in real time. I loved what they did back in April, and there was a reason they were just one of 3 teams to receive an A+ draft grade. The New England Patriots are in today's video for a couple of reasons, and obviously whenever you think of the 2025 Patriots, you rightfully think of Drake May and Mike Vrabel. And Drake May is an MVP candidate and looks to be the future of this franchise for, honestly, 10 to 15 years if he stays healthy. That's it. He is already a top 5 quarterback. He is incredible, and he is just, there's nothing that I can say about Drake May that you already don't know. But pertaining to the 2025 Patriots draft class and why they belong in today's video takes us back to last year when this team lost in Arizona to the Cardinals. That was a very, very ugly game. There was a point in that game where the Patriots had the ball inside the Cardinals' 5-yard line, and Alex Van Pelt was the team's offensive coordinator, and there was a sequence where the Patriots ran the ball inside the 5-yard line. They asked then head coach Gerard Mayo after the game about whether or not he would have liked to have seen Drake May run the football, obviously because Drake May is a dual-threat quarterback, and he can make things happen along the offensive line that, say, somebody like Tom Brady obviously couldn't. And Gerard Mayo answered the question by saying, "You said it, not me," and there was a lot of dysfunction within the organization. The Patriots' offensive line was also very, very bad in 2024, and Drake May was set up for failure. We have covered this in depth throughout the 2024-2025 offseason, and obviously with the success the Patriots are having this year, well, you see it firsthand, what an offensive line can do, what a good offensive coordinator can do, and of course what a good head coach in Mike Vrabel can do. And with the first selection of the Mike Vrabel era, they selected Will Campbell, an offensive lineman from LSU. Now, unfortunately, right now, Will Campbell is hurt, but when he's played in 2025, well, I think it's very fair to say that he is this franchise left tackle of the future. They also selected running back TreVeyon Henderson in the second round, and if I do have one thing to complain about the 2025 Patriots class, it's that TreVeyon Henderson is not used as much, though as we've gotten more towards the end of the 2025 regular season, TreVeyon Henderson has been used more, so it's finally good to see him start to play regularly and for him to get more touches, because the biggest thing with TreVeyon Henderson was simply get him the football. And then there was even a point around the trade deadline this year of, hey, the Patriots might be in the discussions for a running back, and everybody, myself included, was kind of saying, you already have a good running back on your roster, just simply give him the rock and let him play. But now that we are past that, the TreVeyon selection looks really good. They also selected deep threat Kyle Williams in the 3rd round with the 69th overall pick, and when Williams has received the football and when he's had the opportunity to make plays, he's been a nice addition to the team. And of course, the same applies to Jared Wilson, an offensive lineman from Georgia that they selected at the end of the 3rd round, and there's been a couple of welcome to the NFL moments for Jared Wilson, sure, which I think should be expected for a late 3rd round pick, but to receive 3 starters along the offense in Will Campbell, TreVeyon Henderson, and Jared Wilson, potentially a 4th in Kyle Williams, that's obviously a really good class for the Patriots. And there is also a player that Patriots fans are probably wondering why I haven't brought him up yet, and this is a player that is by every definition an unsung hero and a guy that the national media has not discussed anywhere close to as much as they should, and that is defensive back Craig Woodson from Cal. This is a Swiss Army knife by every definition, and in some ways, he kind of reminds me of Patrick Chung, or at least the modern day of Patrick Chung, based on the usage, whether they line him up at single high, whether they bring him down in the box. He is all over the field, and Craig Woodson is a guy that is going to be in New England for, honestly, as long as he wants to be, based on the level that he's playing right now, because Craig Woodson is a player that will probably make every single all-rookie first team as he should, but because he doesn't have, 6 or 7 interceptions or 4 or 5 forced fumbles, and the fact that they have an MVP quarterback and a Coach of the Year candidate in Mike Vrabel, and a coach that probably will win the Coach of the Year in Mike Vrabel, because this team is going to go from the 4th overall pick to maybe the number 1 seed in the conference, well, somebody like Craig Woodson unfortunately flies under the radar, but he too is an insane player and one of the best rookies that we've seen so far in the 2025 regular season, and there's a reason the Patriots are 11-2 at the time of this video release, and it's due in some part to how good the rookie class for them has played in 2025. Now, I wasn't going to include this team in today's video, but they definitely deserve a spot, and the reason I wasn't going to include them is because we're going to be doing a video breaking down their entire situation in a couple of days, so we'll have to resurface the 25 draft in a couple of days, but it's the Minnesota Vikings, and there is almost nothing this team loves to do more, and General Manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah loves to do more, than light picks on fire after the first round, and this draft is a prime example of that. Now, the one positive that the Vikings have within their 2025 draft class is guard Donovan Jackson. Donovan Jackson is a player that looks to be able to start for this team for not just a year or two, but really the next 3, 4, 5 years, and as long as he continues to play at the level he is, and then whenever you think of a player that's already having a good rookie season, naturally you are going to project that player to improve over the course of their career. I mean, that's kind of how the trajectory of a career goes, but after that there is almost zero production from this draft class. They selected receiver Ty Felton at the end of the third round, and right now Ty Felton is a gunner on special teams, and whenever you select a player in the third round, obviously you want some sort of contribution as a rookie, and I will say, at least in somewhat fairness to Ty Felton here, that even if he was a really good third round rookie, based on the level of quarterback play that the Vikings have had in 2025, his production would be limited, but it's the fact that he's at minimum a wide receiver 4 on this team, behind, of course, Jefferson, Addison, and Jalen Naylor, which was already a questionable move to begin with, and I also thought it was a questionable pick to begin with because there were two very clear receivers that I liked on the board a lot more than I liked Ty Felton, and for reference, I didn't have Ty Felton inside my top 140, but I really liked Alec Iomanner, who went to the Titans on day 3, and Torrey Horton, who went to the Seahawks on day 3, both players that I had in my top 100 that the Vikings passed on for a, again, special teams gunner. They selected Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins in the 5th round, and whenever you are selecting in the 5th round, it's obviously not fair to hold Ingram-Dawkins to the level of play that should be expected from a first or second round player, and then they had 2 selections after the pick 200 mark, which, again, if we are being completely honest, there should not be really anything expected from either of those players in their rookie year, and that was linebacker Kobe King, who, by the way, is no longer on the roster as he's on the Jets at the moment, and tight end Gavin Bartholomew, who is on the physically unable to perform list, and when you look at this team's game plan with the 2025 draft from the start of bringing Donovan Jackson, great, that's a good pick. You needed to improve the interior offensive line, but after that, it was bad, and there's a reason the Vikings are 4-8, and it's because they have next to zero depth on the roster, and it's because not just when you have one bad year of drafting, but several bad years of drafting, that's where you get to where they are now. And again, we are going to break all of this down within the Vikings-specific video that's going to come out in a couple of days, but with how bad this draft class has been, I really felt that they deserved a spot in today's video. Right now, there are a couple of other big winners and losers from the 25 draft so far on the screen, but I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe as we are closing in on 225,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you enough for the support. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys. While that is, every NFL team has the same goal entering each and every year, and that of course is to win the Super Bowl. And when you think of how difficult things can be, whether on the football field or in life, that is a very simple goal. Obviously, the journey to get there is going to be trying, and there's going to be a lot of adversity, but the goal itself is simple. And as proven time and time again, the best way to win a Super Bowl is to build through the NFL draft. The Eagles' 2024 draft class featured guys like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, and even their 2023 draft class featured guys like Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith. And it paid off as they won Super Bowl 59, and they've done a tremendous job of building their roster largely through the NFL draft. And in today's video, we're going to break down some of the biggest draft regrets over the past few years. What we mean by this is guys who fell that shouldn't have, or teams simply drafting inferior prospects when better players were on the board. Now, for clarity, we're not going to include outliers like Brock Purdy, who of course was the final pick in the 22 draft, or Mr. Irrelevant, or even Puka Nacua, who was a 5th round pick in the 2023 draft. They each have exceeded even the wildest expectations the 49ers or Rams could have had for them, and they also weren't first-round prospects or close to being first-round prospects during their draft process. Instead, we are going to focus on other misses in the first few rounds of each of the past few drafts. Also, I don't want to include any obvious ones, most notably Justin Jefferson over Jalen Reagor, for example. But there is a lot to dive into in today's video, and with that preface out of the way, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the 2022 Vikings draft class. As you'll see later in today's video, we'll discuss more specific picks, but this is dedicated to an entire class. The 2022 draft is most known for two things. One, not having a great quarterback prospect, as Kenny Pickett was the only quarterback selected in the first two rounds of the 2022 draft, and for how great the secondary was in this draft. Now, Brock Purdy of course became an outlier, as there was a reason he fell to the 262nd pick to begin with, and even San Francisco passed over him multiple times. But the 2022 draft class, and more specifically the secondary in this class, featured guys like Sauce Gardner, who, yes, is having a tough start to the 2025 season, but is still a two-time first-team All-Pro, Derek Stingley, Kyle Hamilton, Trent McDuffie, Kirby Joseph, Deron Bland, Rick Woolen, and you get the point. This class was loaded, and there's several more players from this class too. And the Vikings had the 12th overall pick in this draft, and it wouldn't have been unreasonable for them to take any of Kyle Hamilton, Trent McDuffie, or Tyler Linderbaum with their first round pick. All were positions of need, and all were great draft prospects, especially Kyle Hamilton. And why the Vikings are specifically in today's video is because not only did they not take a good player in this spot, they traded back with a division rival 20 spots so that the Lions could come up and take Alabama wide receiver Jameson Williams. And the trade value the Vikings got back was, in my opinion, awful, because they traded back from pick 12 to receive picks 32, 34, and 66 at the beginning in the third round in exchange for picks 12 and 46. And if you were going to make this trade and trade out of a very good prospect in Kyle Hamilton, especially to a division rival, you better make sure you are winning this on the trade value chart, and they didn't. There should have been a big tax for this trade because they were division rivals, and because whoever the Lions were going to come up and get would have to play the Vikings twice a year, and the Lions made out with Aiden Hutchinson and Jameson Williams, while the Vikings added insult to injury and traded back to draft Georgia safety Lewis Cine. And because he was the 32nd pick in the draft and not a top 5 or top 10 pick, it kind of flies under the radar of just how bad of a selection and process this was. Vikings fans of course know this, but Lewis Cine is honestly an all-time draft bust, as he played 10 total defensive snaps for the Vikings before being cut prior to the 2024 season. 8 of those 10 snaps came in a blowout loss to the Packers in 2023 in a game Jaren Hall started at quarterback for Minnesota. The Vikings also drafted a corner in the second round, which was Clemson's Andrew Booth. Booth played very sparingly in his first 2 years in Minnesota, as he logged a little over 250 defensive snaps in his time in the Twin Cities before being traded to the Cowboys in exchange for corner Nashawn Wright. So for the Vikings to address the secondary not once but twice within the top 45 of the 22 draft in what could be described as a generational draft from a defensive back standpoint, as there's not many drafts that have as many good DBs as the 22 draft had, hence the very rare yet applicable use of the word generational, the Vikings whiffed on both defensive backs, and also received the honor of having to deal with Jameson Williams twice a year for the next several years. And Vikings GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has received a lot of criticism for his draft classes, and the 2022 draft started it all. They also selected guard Ed Ingram and linebacker Brian Asamoah inside the top 70 of the draft, and neither player is currently on the roster. And T-building starts through the draft, and a few years later, there's no doubt the Vikings have a lot of regret about the 2022 draft. And today's video is sponsored by Prize Picks and my code GFB. We were 2 of 3 on picks last week, 3 of 4 if you want to include the one with the half-yard prop, and we're looking to go 3 of 3 this week, and that is again with the season-long partner of the channel, Prize Picks. And with my Week 5 lineup using code GFB, I like Jahmyr Gibbs more than 75.5 rushing yards. Pretty straightforward. I think Detroit can pounce on Cincy, especially with the way Cincy's looked over the past couple of weeks, and I think that the Lions are going to run the ball a lot, so I think Jahmyr Gibbs will get a lot of touches, and I like more than 75.5 rushing yards. I also like Sam Darnold more than 4.5 rushing yards against Tampa, as it's 4.5 rushing yards. If an edge comes around the play one time, Sam Darnold can step up and scoot out of the pocket and pick up 5 yards to hit more than 4.5 rushing yards. I also like Ladd McConkey more than 54.5 receiving yards, and Ladd has had a slow start to the year. He only has one game with 50 or more yards in the first couple of weeks, and I think against Washington this is a good game for him to get back on track, and I like Ladd McConkey more than 54.5 receiving yards. So download the PrizePicks app and use code GFB, and when you do make your first $5 deposit, PrizePicks will give you $50 in lineups instantly. We are close to achieving the 100 sign-up goal, so if you do sign up, we will be 1% closer to the said goal, and again, that's when you use code GFB on PrizePicks. Always play responsibly, and a big thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. Next up is a player that to this day I have no idea how he felt in the 2023 NFL Draft, and that is Lions defensive back Brian Branch. Brian Branch to me was a player that I would not have minded my team, the Minnesota Vikings, taking him at the first round where they eventually selected USC receiver Jordan Addison. He was a player that I thought was a top 15 player in the class, really top 20 at worst, and that there were far more strengths in his game than weaknesses, and I thought that Brian Branch was kind of the definition of a good football player. And whenever teams are in the NFL draft process, I think there's times where they overcomplicate the process, and if you simply draft good football players like Brian Branch, or like a player we will soon discuss on the offensive side of the football, who in some ways is kind of the Brian Branch of the offense, if you will. He does a lot of things right, while not necessarily at an elite level, but at a good enough level to still be a good football player and a guy that could make a Pro Bowl or two throughout his career. Well, Brian Branch is that guy. He's a player that you can play in the slot, you can play him at single high, you can even play at outside corner in a pinch, which the Lions have done a couple of times this year, by the way, and he's also a really good tackler that can come up and fit in the run game too. And for him to be the 46th pick in the draft is definitely something the NFL would like to do over, and there was a report that came out in late August of 2025 that the Saints, or that Mickey Loomis ruled over Jeff Ireland that he was going to take Isaiah Foskey, a pass rusher from Notre Dame, over Brian Branch, and I don't want this to be a complete slander of Mickey Loomis because he's had several questionable draft decisions, but if that is true, and by the way, that's the only confirmed draft report that we have that somebody specifically said that they took a player over Brian Branch, because there were far more questionable prospects than just taking Isaiah Foskey over Brian Branch. I have no idea what the thought process was heading into that, and why you would justify taking a player like Isaiah Foskey, who is no longer on the Saints roster, over Brian Branch when he has done everything that he's done for the Lions over the past 2 years. And for the purpose of this video, I went back and looked at a couple of numbers, and during his time in college, he played nearly 1,700 total defensive snaps for Alabama, and as you probably guessed, he missed a grand total of 4 tackles during his time with the Crimson Tide, and one of them was, funnily enough, against Bijan Robinson. So if you are going to miss a tackle against a player, I think missing a tackle against Bijan Robinson, one of only 4 that he missed in his entire collegiate career, is very acceptable, as Bijan is a Pro Bowl NFL running back, and if he stays healthy, there's a very real possibility that Bijan could have a gold jacket. Anyway, look, Brian Branch is a really good player, really good draft selection by the Lions in what was a tremendous draft class for the Lions, as not only did they bring in Brian Branch in 2023, but they also brought in Jahmyr Gibbs, an Offensive Player of the Year caliber running back, Jack Campbell, a really good linebacker who took a step from 2024 to 2025, and of course Sam Laporta, a tight end from Iowa. Now, I did bring up the Mickey Loomis part, and if I am going to criticize or make a comment about somebody else, I will at least make one about myself as well. I was very critical of the Sam Laporta selection when it was made. I thought that the Lions should have taken Michael Mayer, who I thought was a superior prospect to Sam Laporta. So if I am going to make that comment about Mickey Loomis, I am at least going to say that about myself as well, that I thought Mayer was a much better prospect than Laporta, and it turns out that Ben Johnson and now John Morton and of course Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes too by default had a plan for Laporta, and they've executed perfectly. But the bottom line is Brian Branch is a tremendous player, and he should have never fell to the 46th pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. The regret, to be clear for the purpose of this video, is that the NFL let that happen, because he was a top 15 or top 20 player all along. And one big thing that we discuss on the channel is to just draft good football players. And what I mean by drafting good football players are players that have relatively high floors, that have very few flaws in their game. Now, that doesn't make them perfect players or the G word, generational prospects. But what I mean by this is players like Brian Branch, who you probably can assume are going to be rock solid for the next couple of years, and Brian Branch has been more than rock solid, and so has Bucs receiver Emeka Egbuka through the first couple of starts through his career. Now, this is not a shot at any team in front of the Bucs for taking Emeka Egbuka. It's more of a how did we let him fall to pick 19, because again, this was a really good player that was consistently overthought throughout the entire draft process. There were a lot of people that were basically saying, well, he's okay or he's solid, but he's never going to do this or he's never going to do that. And in some ways, he was a product of Marvin Harrison Jr., or he was a product of Jeremiah Smith, who is a really good 2027 draft prospect for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and that he's always going to be in the shadow of somebody else. And in his NFL debut against the Falcons, he had 67 yards and 2 touchdowns, and most recently in Week 4 against the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, Emeka Egbuka had his first career 100-yard game. I do think that there are some teams that, over the course of time, will regret not drafting Emeka Egbuka, and like I said, this is not a shot at any one particular team. The Emeka Egbuka inclusion in the video is more of a respect to him because of the start to the NFL career that he's had, and I couldn't be happier for him because the Bucs have went through their fair share of injuries, unfortunately, like everyone else has to start the 2025 season, so I did at least want to include one rookie and show them some love, especially with the start to the year that Egbuka has had in Tampa, and I hope that it continues, and I think that there's a very real possibility that he's not just a 1,000-yard player in his first season, but that he could be a 1,000-yard player for the next 2 or 3 years. I'm not going to say that he's going to be the next Mike Evans and have it be for the first decade plus of his career, because that is way too far to project into the future, but it's been a very promising start to Emeka Egbuka's career, and I couldn't be happier for him and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Next up is one from the 2024 NFL Draft, and it involves a receiver who is a pretty good route runner, who's also a hardworking guy, and a real first one in, last one out type player, maybe even a guy who brings his lunch pail to work, and that of course is Ladd McConkey, going number 34 to the Chargers. I thought Ladd was a really solid prospect coming out of Georgia, and in his first year with the Chargers had over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns, and was one of the best receivers from the 2024 class. It was the LSU guys in Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, and then, of course, Ladd. And there is some draft regret from the Panthers, who took Xavier Legette at number 32 overall, and hell, even Buffalo with Keon Coleman at number 33, and honestly, you could even make a case for Kansas City too, who took Xavier Worthy at number 28 overall, as Ladd McConkey would be a tremendous player to pair with Patrick Mahomes, but the real regret is New England trading back 3 spots to take Jalen Polk from Washington. And I have no problem with a team like the Patriots trading back at that specific point in time, as they were a very bad football team in 2023, and they didn't accidentally stumble into the number 3 pick in the 2024 draft, which of course was used on Drake May. But where I do have a problem is trading back 3 spots to help another team in the conference to take an inferior player at the same position you were already targeting. Now, out of all of the receivers we mentioned during this part, starting with Worthy, I had Ladd McConkey highest on my final top 150 big board in 2024, as I had him at player 34, versus having Polk at 43 and Legette at 46. And we are a little over 20 games into these guys' careers now, and I never would have guessed that Jalen Polk would already be on his second NFL team, which only adds insult to injury for the Patriots in this specific situation. Polk finished his rookie season with just 12 receptions for 87 yards, and the Jalen Polk that we saw on tape during his rookie year looked absolutely nothing like the Jalen Polk we saw during the 2023 season with Washington, and alongside his fellow Husky teammates in Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, and Jalen McMillan, and even offensive linemen Troy Fautanu and Roger Rosengarten. With New England, he looked slow and could not win contested catches, or routes for that matter too. And in August of this year, it was announced he was going to have season-ending shoulder surgery, and less than a month later, it was announced the Patriots were trading him and a 2028 7th-round pick in exchange for a 2027 6th-round pick, which meant New England was really done with him just a little over a year into his career. And there's times in the NFL draft where, as simple as this idea is, just take the layups. You don't need to get cute and trade out of a pick to potentially draft another good player in the 3rd or 4th round to have extra draft capital when the time rolls around. I thought Ladd McConkey was a pretty straightforward evaluation. Ironically, he was a good route runner with good hands and a guy who knows how to get open, and based on where New England's current receiving situation is, Ladd McConkey was exactly what they needed, yet they traded out of drafting him so that he could become a Charger instead. The Panthers at this point probably regret drafting Xavier Legette, as he has 4 receptions for 8 yards in his second season on 15 targets, and it's been an absolute nightmare for him in 2025. Though because they had Adam Thielen already on the roster, and Legette at his best is clearly a different style of player than Thielen, I can at least understand the thought process of drafting Legette in that situation, and I don't want to have this be a result of 2020 hindsight. Xavier is a player I'm shocked that has played the way he has in the NFL, but he was a height-weight speed guy who you could get open on drags, screens, or deep crossers and get the ball in his hands, and that's a bit of a different situation, though I completely acknowledge the frustration Panthers fans have with Anthony Legette in 2025, but I also do acknowledge having Adam Thielen already on the roster when this pick was made. Now, one thing I do want to be clear about today's video is I don't want this to be revisionist history after the fact. These were decisions that, as they were happening, I had no idea why teams were making these said decisions, and obviously the Justin Jefferson and Jalen Reagor is kind of the poster child of this type of video, but I do think in some ways that the defensive version of the Justin Jefferson-Jalen Reagor selection was when the Washington Commanders selected Emmanuel Forbes over Christian Gonzalez. I thought Christian Gonzalez was a really good corner prospect, and before the Eagles traded up to go get Jalen Carter with the Chicago Bears and to move up 1 pick, I originally mocked Christian Gonzalez going to the Eagles quite a bit because I thought that that was a really good pairing for the Philadelphia Eagles, and ironically the Eagles got the best of both worlds as they selected a really good defensive tackle in Jalen Carter, and Jalen Carter fell to pick 9 for off-the-field reasons. He didn't fall because he was the 9th best player in the class. It was pretty clear to everyone that he was a top 2 or 3 talent in the class, depending on where you had him and Bijan Robinson, and he was a really good player, right? So whenever you look at this, the Eagles eventually did get Quinyon Mitchell the following year, but the reality is I thought Christian Gonzalez going in the top 10 was a very fair scenario, and whenever the Commanders had Christian Gonzalez fall into their lap, again, a player who I thought was a top 10 player in the 2023 draft, I was baffled whenever they took Emmanuel Forbes with the 16th overall pick. Now, I think looking back, the justification for the Commanders was because of how many pick sixes Emmanuel Forbes had in his collegiate career, that he was this ball-hawking type player, you know, this Trayvon Diggs or Deron Bland type player that, yes, he's going to get beat a fair amount, but when he's right, and he can really flip the game at any point. And while that is a good thought process to have in some scenarios, I don't think with the 16th overall pick it's necessarily the best thought process to have, especially with a consistent, more reliable corner available in Christian Gonzalez, and that is one of the biggest reasons the Commanders make today's video. And even with the Washington Commanders in the 2022 draft, they had another baffling draft process in which they traded out of the 11th pick so that they could trade back 5 spots with the New Orleans Saints, who drafted Chris Olave, while the Commanders traded back 5 spots to take Jahan Dotson. I am also a Penn State fan, and I obviously watched both players pretty regularly throughout their collegiate careers, and never once did I think Jahan Dotson was close to being the player Chris Olave was. So from a process standpoint, I thought that that was also pretty bad by the Washington Commanders, and then they followed it up with selecting Fedarian Mathis in the 2nd round, and that was, to me, another baffling decision when it was made because they already had Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen on the roster, and not that I'm opposed to another big-bodied defensive tackle in the middle of your defense, but I was not a huge Fedarian Mathis fan in the draft process, and he's no longer on the roster. So for the Commanders to kind of botch both the 1st and 2nd round of the 2022 draft, at least from a process standpoint, well, there was a reason that they selected number 2 in the 2024 draft, and I know Jaden Daniels made a lot of things right, but these are definitely draft regrets teams have years later because the draft is how you build your team, and there's reasons that whenever you look at the teams that are selecting consistently top 5 or top 10, it's because they do dysfunctional things, and I know Commanders fans would like to forget about the Ron Rivera era, but the Emmanuel Forbes over Christian Gonzalez selection and then willingly trading back out of Chris Olave were 2 decisions that I completely disagreed with from the start. The biggest thing that I want to hammer home in today's video is it's easy to sit back and look at and say, man, we should have drafted Brock Purdy with a 4th round pick, much less the final pick in the draft, or even based on the production that he's had, a 1st round pick, or even Puka Nacua with a 1st round pick, but those guys fell in the draft for reasons that they did. I mean, obviously it's easy to sit back in hindsight and say, but from a process standpoint, that was what I wanted to highlight in today's video. And I will say from a process standpoint, I fully agreed with what the Giants did in the 2022 draft in the 1st round with selecting a pass rusher in Kayvon Thibodeaux and a pass protector in Evan Neal. And I was really hoping that Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal would be the tackle duo of the future in New York, and unfortunately that didn't work out, but they don't make today's video because, again, I agreed with the decisions that Joe Schoen made from a process standpoint. Now, it is unfortunate that Evan Neal became a draft bust for all the wrong reasons and that he asked fans if they flip burgers and that whole thing, but the process itself was right, and that is one that I do agree with. Now, if there is one thing to nitpick from the 2022 draft for the Giants, I never agreed with selecting Wan'Dale Robinson over a player like George Pickens, and I think that that decision could warrant some criticism, but with KT and Evan Neal specifically in the 1st round, again, everything that we knew pre-draft, I will go to battle and say that Kayvon Thibodeaux and Evan Neal, at least from a process standpoint, were the right decisions, that if you're going to criticize Joe Schoen as a GM, there are far bigger things that you could criticize him for, whether it was like Saquon go or letting Daniel Jones go now that we've seen the success that he's had in Indy, or simply not helping him out as much as they could have during his time in New York. And there's been several players that have came out over the past year or two that even before the success that Daniel Jones has had in Indy, that it was never a Daniel Jones problem. So if you want to criticize Joe Schoen, look a lot further than Kayvon Thibodeaux and Evan Neal, because again, I fully agreed with those decisions at the time, and from a process standpoint, I think they were the right decisions. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe, as we are closing in at 215,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's video. I understand that that's not for everyone, but if it is, always play responsibly, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys. The NFL Draft takes place each and every year, and during the 3-day event in late April, we often hear that we'll know how this class will turn out in about 3 years, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that some draft classes are better than others. And during the pre-draft process, you'll hear the word generational tossed around far too often about prospects, in hopes that the said player will be the best player at his position in a few short years. But speaking from an overall draft class standpoint, it is not an exaggeration to say the 2011 draft class was not just generational, but legendary. It had it all. Each of the first 7 picks in the 2011 draft were Pro Bowlers, and each of the first 6 picks were multiple-time Pro Bowlers. And 5 of the first 6 picks were all first-team All-Pros at some point in their career. This class has a regular season MVP, a Super Bowl MVP, a plural, multiple-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner, 2 receivers with over 10,000 career receiving yards, and not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 players with over 100 career sacks. And to put it simply, this class had it all. And in today's video, we're going to break down just how legendary the 2011 draft class was. And before we get started, I do want to thank the NFL directly for allowing me to create this video and for allowing me to be a part of the Creator Access Pass. It means a lot and is very humbling, and without further ado, let's begin! We are starting today's video by discussing the number 1 pick in the draft in Auburn's Cam Newton. Newton was one of the most athletically gifted quarterbacks in NFL history, and he was an incredibly fun player to watch in his prime. He started his NFL career off with back-to-back 420-plus passing yard games, and I remember specifically after the Week 2 game against the Packers in 2011 that a prime Aaron Rodgers, who was on his way to having a 45-6 touchdown interception season, said that Cam would be a problem once he figured out how to win. And in his rookie year, and this is not an exaggeration for the younger audience who may not remember, Cam had over 4,700 yards of total offense and 35 total touchdowns. This was also in a 16-game regular season, and needless to say, at 22 years old, the Panthers had their franchise quarterback. Now, I know the Pro Bowl in 2025 does not have the meaning it once did, but a 4,700 total yard, 35 total touchdown season is definitely a Pro Bowl caliber season, and not surprisingly, Cam also won the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. He had success in each of his next 3 seasons, including another trip to the Pro Bowl in 2013, and in the year where the Panthers went 12-4, Cam had another good season and made the Pro Bowl. Despite losing in the divisional round in 2013, everything came together in 2015 as the Panthers went 15-1, and Cam Newton had 45 total touchdowns, including a 35-10 TD to INT ratio, which was by far the best of his career, and he won the MVP. Unfortunately, the Panthers lost in the Super Bowl to the Broncos, and believe it or not, the number 2 pick in this class in Von Miller was the Super Bowl MVP. We'll get to Von in a minute, but out of the 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round, Cam was by far the best. The other 3 were Jake Locker, who went to the Titans, Blaine Gabbert, who went to the Jags, and Christian Ponder, who went to the Vikings. Cam was everything the Panthers could have hoped for and more, as he helped turn a franchise around, and they legitimately felt that anytime Cam was on the field, they had a chance to win. Despite Cam winning an MVP and making multiple Pro Bowls, he actually doesn't have the most passing yards or touchdowns from this class, as that belongs to Andy Dalton. And we'll get to the Bengals 2011 draft class in a minute, but before we do, it's time to go back to Von Miller. Whenever we talk about players in their primes and talk about how they will be a really good player by the time they're in their 3rd or 4th season, that didn't apply to Von Miller. He had 60 pressures and 11.5 sacks as a rookie and was a second-team All-Pro. He had 18.5 sacks in his second season as well as a pick 6 and was a first-team All-Pro. And he finished second in the Defensive Player of the Year voting to, you guessed it, another 2011 draftee in J.J. Watt, who had a downright insane 39 tackles for a loss and 20.5 sacks as he was on his way to his first of 3 DPOYs. Von only played 9 games in 2013, but from 2014 through 2018, he had perfect attendance as he played in all 80 games. He was a 5-time All-Pro with 2 more first-team appearances, had 63 sacks, 14 forced fumbles, and the most important of all, a Super Bowl MVP on what was one of the best defenses of all time. Von's peak was incredible, and the future Hall of Famer is a 7-time All-Pro and has 129.5 career sacks. And for those who may not remember, the pre-draft hype for Von was really high. And anytime you were drafted either 1st or 2nd overall as a pass rusher, you were expected to be a franchise-changing player. And Von Miller was exactly that. Buffalo had the 3rd pick, and they used it on the big fella from Alabama in Marcell Dareus. I personally think Marcell is a player that doesn't get talked about enough for how much of an impact he had on each and every game. He was a really good run defender and even made the Pro Bowl twice during his 9-year career, and was a first-team All-Pro in 2014. He anchored the Bills' defense for the first several years of his career before eventually being traded to the Jags during the 2017 season. Unfortunately for Dareus, he is a part of a legendary draft class that had a lot of productive defensive players, and he also played a position that Aaron Donald played, who entered the NFL when Dareus was in year 4, and defensive tackle is already a position that does not get as much national love as it probably should, and I think these all contribute as to why Dareus isn't discussed as a part of the 2010s probably as much as he should be. He was also in an era with guys like Geno Atkins, Calais Campbell, and Ndamukong Suh, and you get the point. But Dareus was a really good defensive tackle, and there was a reason they signed him to a near $100 million contract extension, which was huge at the time. Now, for the Bengals, they had one of the best draft classes in their franchise's history, as they selected A.J. Green and Andy Dalton with the first 2 picks. I know 2020 was obviously with Joe Burrow and T. Higgins, and that's why I said one of the best classes in franchise history. But A.J. Green started his career with 7 straight Pro Bowls, and nearly started his career off with 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons, as he had 964 yards in 2016 in just 10 games. I would argue the biggest pitfall for A.J. Green in his NFL career was being in the same draft class as Julio Jones, and ultimately having his peak be at the same time as guys like Julio Jones, Des Bryant, Antonio Brown, and even Odell Beckham Jr. What is unfortunate for Adriel Jeremiah is a player selected 2 picks after him was one of the 2 best receivers in the entire decade. But A.J. Green finished his career with over 10,000 yards, 2 second-team All-Pros, and 6 1,000-yard seasons. Now, for Andy Dalton, he's still active and just finished his 14th NFL season. Sure, he's bounced around over the past 5 years, as after his time in Cincinnati, he played for the Cowboys, the Bears, even the Saints for a year, and now the Panthers for each of the last 2 seasons. But the Bengals took a chance on Andy Dalton in the 2nd round, and he made 3 Pro Bowls during his time in Cincinnati, and I know Joe Burrow is a much better player than Andy Dalton, obviously, but Andy took the Bengals to the playoffs in each of his first 5 seasons, and had 50 wins in 5 years as their starting quarterback. He wasn't a top 10 pick or a number 1 overall pick, but a guy selected in the 2nd round, and as of now, he's 26th in both passing yards and passing touchdowns all time. I don't think Andy is an all-time player by any means, but I do think his prime is a little underappreciated because he played in the early to mid-2010s with guys like Brady, Manning, Breeze, and Rodgers. But for Cincinnati to draft both Andy Dalton and A.J. Green, and even draft an offensive lineman in the 4th round who would go on to start for 7 seasons for them in Clint Bowling, was a tremendous haul for the Cincinnati Bengals. Patrick Peterson was the 5th overall pick, and Pat Pete started his career with 8 straight Pro Bowls and was a member of the 2010s All-Decade team. He was also a very dynamic punt returner early in his career, as he had 4 punt returns for a touchdown in his rookie year, one of which was an overtime game winner against the then St. Louis Rams. Patrick Peterson was one of the best corner prospects we've seen in the past 15 years, and he more than proved the Cardinals right, as he was also a 3-time first-team All-Pro. There was a point where the Cardinals periodically tried to incorporate him into the offense, as he had 6 receptions during the 2013 season, and even carried the football a couple of times too. Peterson was a highly sought-after draft prospect, and he was a franchise cornerstone for a long time in the desert. Peterson played for a team that did not have a lot of success outside of the 2015 season, in which they went to the NFC Championship game, and a special shout out to Larry Fitzgerald for the big play in the divisional round against the Packers, but Peterson was undoubtedly one of the best corners from his era, along with fellow NFC West rival Richard Sherman, who was also a part of the 2011 draft class. Richard Sherman didn't play as long as Pat Pete, but his impact was significant, as he had a tremendous 4-year stretch between 2012 and 2015, and he is the most known player from Seattle's Legion of Boom. Sherm was a 3-time first-team All-Pro from 2012 to 2014, and was a second-team All-Pro in 2015, and he is most known for his elite football IQ, his trash-talking, and being able to back up the trash-talking, and being one of the biggest tone-setters at the corner position we've seen this century. One of, by the way, not the biggest, as I'm not throwing shade at Darrelle Revis by any means. Sherm had back-to-back 8-interception seasons in 2012 and 2013, and made a play known as the Immaculate Deflection in the 2013 NFC Championship game, which sent Seattle to their first Super Bowl appearance since 2005. There was a point in Sherman's prime where teams didn't even bother throwing his way. He was that good. The Legion of Boom allowed the fewest passing yards in the NFL in 2013, and they absolutely dismantled the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl with an MVP-winning Peyton Manning, who had just thrown 55 touchdowns with a score of 43-8. There's draft classes that don't have Hall of Famers, and there's draft classes that may only have 1 Hall of Famer, but it's extremely rare to have 2 corners in the same class that will probably get inducted in Canton within a few years of this video. And Richard Sherman and Patrick Peterson, to me, are both Hall of Fame players. Now, I'll be honest, as an analyst in their mid-20s, I know Julio Jones' numbers do not compare with the all-time greats, as he's 27th in receptions, 16th in receiving yards, and tied for 61st in touchdowns all-time, as touchdowns were always tough for Julio, but to me, he was the definition of a player you had to watch live to truly understand how special he was. Julio had 7 1,000-yard seasons, and these weren't just 1,022 yards in a year where he barely clears the number. No. Each of Julio's 1,000-yard seasons were all 1,198 yards or more, and I kind of feel bad for Julio that he couldn't get 2 more yards in 2012 to have 7 1,200-yard seasons, but if you ask any fan that remembers watching him play from the 2012 to 2019 span, he was an animal. The 2015 season between him and Antonio Brown going back and forth was incredibly fun, and in a 16-game season, Julio had 136 receptions for 1,871 yards and 8 touchdowns. He was obviously a first-team All-Pro, and I am not using this video to talk about where he ranks all-time, because again, the numbers do not do Julio justice, but to have 6 seasons of 1,394 yards or more is ridiculous, and Julio also had 5 seasons of 1,400 yards or more. Your best bet in his prime was to double him and hope you could slow him down. A lot of younger people like to use the phrase "I'm him" when they make a play in today's era, but everyone knew it. Julio was him in his prime, and he has one of the best plays that's also unfortunately one of the most forgotten plays in Super Bowl history, and I did not know how to mention that, Falcons fans, so I apologize for bringing that specific